大家晚安。
Good evening to everyone.
那我们继续接续我们前面2天的主题，就是摩西的中年危机跟灵修。
And this evening we shall continue our topic from the last 2 nights, and that is Moses' midlife crisis and spiritual cultivation.
比如说摩西，我已经跟大家介绍过什么是中年危机。
And I've already discussed and explained to everyone what is midlife crisis.
那中年之后的挑战是什么
？And what are the challenges that one might face when they reach midlife?
那也谈到什么是灵修。
And we've also talked about what is spiritual cultivation.
那我们昨天也谈到摩西的中年。
And yesterday we talked about when Moses was in his midlife.
他有一个很高的理想。
And he had a very high ideals.
他的人生也他想要做一个很大的转变。
And he wanted to make great changes in his life.
是因为他看见了他的兄弟希伯来人受苦。
And because he saw with his own eyes the sufferings that his fellow Hebrew men were experiencing.
所以他把他的苦难跟他兄弟的苦难把它连接在一起。
And therefore he put together his own sufferings as well as the sufferings of the Hebrews.
那放弃了这种从最终所得到的一种喜乐，一种最终之乐。
And he let go of the certain pleasures that he originally had.
但是因为神并没有给他启示说要他怎么做。
However, because God did not directly reveal to him what God wanted him to do,
所以他就以一般的模式，就是准备用革命的方式来解决这个问题。
And therefore, as a result, he uses his own method to try to deal with the issue.
所以当他用他的武力用来把一个正在欺负希伯来人的埃及人打死之后。
And by using violence, when he killed the Egyptian who was bullying his fellow Hebrew brethren,
他想要间接用这种方式来给他的希伯来人有一个希望。
And he wanted to use this kind of method through aggression to give hope to his fellow men.
就是说用武力是可以解决这个问题的。
By telling them that by using violence they can solve their problems.
但是他一开始他还没有他开始做事很低调的，不要让人家知道。
In the very beginning, when he did all this, he did everything in secret, very low key.
但没想到隔天就被人知道了。
However, unknown to him, that the very next day, what he had done was being made public.
甚至质疑他的是他被他救过的人。
And moreover, the person who pointed out it was his fault was the person that he saved in the incident.
他说：“谁立你做我们的这个首领跟审判官呢？”
So the Hebrew man actually responded to Moses saying, "Who has set you over us to be judge over us?"
那所以那时候摩西就很害怕。
And at that time, Moses became really afraid.
就跑掉了。
And then he ran away.
那我们都会以为是他觉得他杀人了，被人家知道了，跑掉了。
And so for most people, we would assume that it is because he had committed murder, therefore he had to flee away.
但是希伯来书作者说，他离开埃及之前是不怕王怒。
And however, the author of the book of Hebrews written that when Moses left Egypt, he was not afraid of the wrath of Pharaoh.
那这个不怕王怒一写下去了之后呢，我们这种假设就有问题了。
And because the author of Hebrew has written this statement, therefore our assumption would be incorrect.
所以我们换另外一个角度来看。
And therefore, we must view this incident from a different perspective.
因为圣经说他是从法老的面前离开嘛。
And because the Bible recorded that Moses departed from the face of Pharaoh.
换句话说，他应该杀人之后并没有马上跑走，应该是还有进到皇宫去了甚至还见到法老的面。
In other words, that in the event when he murdered the Egyptian, he did not immediately flee the country. Rather, he still had the chance to enter into the palace to come before Pharaoh.
我已经跟他解释过，3500年前的社会不像我们现在这样子。
And I've also already discussed with all of you that the society about 3,500 years ago is very different to ours today.
你现在的不管是总统啦，或是总理杀人都要判刑的。
So in today's society, no matter who you are, whether you're the prime minister, if you have committed murder, you must be put to justice.
但是在那个时候不是这样子的。
However, in the time of Moses, this was not the case.
所以王要杀他，不是因为他杀人。
And Pharaoh wanted to kill Moses. It is not because Moses murdered the Egyptian.
是因为他不愿意保有法老女儿养子的身份。
It is because Moses refused to retain his status as the son of Pharaoh's daughter.
对，那他自己摩西想法是他不想要压迫希伯来人的他的原因是这样子。
And the reason why Moses did refuse his special status is because he no longer wished to continually oppress his own people.
但王要杀他是怕他总有一天会起来反抗这个埃及政府。
And Pharaoh sought for his life. It is because Pharaoh feared that in the future Moses might lead a rebellion against him.
所以他又不能带王宫，然后又不能够带领希伯来人来反抗政府，所以他没有别条路可以走。
So as for Moses, he could not continue to stay in a palace, nor can he lead the Israelites to go against Pharaoh. Therefore, he had nowhere else he could go.
所以难怪圣经说他因着信离开埃及，圣经才这样想。
And that is why the Bible specifically recorded that it is by faith Moses departed from Egypt.
而且说他是存心忍耐。
And it also describes that he chose to suffer affliction.
存心忍耐endure.
Oh, sorry. So the Bible also record that he endured through all these things.
那意思说他在旷野其实是过得非常不好的。
And the fact is that his life in the wilderness was not easy.
甚至40年之后什么都没有。
And that after 40 years he did not gain anything.
雅各20年之后至少还有财产很多，然后儿女成群，他什么都没有。
At least for the case of Jacob, after 20 years, he was able to obtain some inheritance as well as to have his own family and children.
但是呢，如果他那时候放弃的话，只有一条路，就是回到埃及继续做他的王子。
But for Moses at the time, if he chose to give up in what he was doing, his only choice was to return back to Egypt and to once again become the prince of Egypt.
所以这个不肯称法老女儿之子，这个不只是指他之前，也指他逃到埃及之后，逃到旷野之后的那种坚持。
And so the phrase by describing Moses refusing to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter not only referred to the time when he left Egypt, but also referred to the time after he lived in the wilderness, which represents his endurance.
所以40年到他40岁之后的这个中年生活，其实他过得非常的应该是不是很快乐啦。
And so for Moses, when he reached his midlife for 40 years, his life was not one that is quite pleasant for him.
你几乎看不到什么记载，他什么记录了。
And we cannot see any recordings of his life in the Bible for this period of time.
整个就空白的，整个人生空白。
That it is as if to say that his life in this stage was completely blank.
你可以想想看，那种起床一大早，天还没亮就要带羊出去吃草喝水。
And so you can imagine the life that Moses had to live at the time. The moment he wakes up in the morning, then he needs to prepare himself to bring the flock out to graze.
然后一阵子之后把羊带回来。
And after that, then he must gather his flock to come back.
这个不是他小时候的工作。
So this was not the type of job that he was used to from young.
他以前是学了埃及的学问，又满身的武功。
And in the past, he had learned all the knowledge of Egypt as well as acquiring a lot of skills.
那个有武功的是可以当将军的，是可以带领军队去打仗的。
And with this kind of training, he can even lead the army to go out for battle.
但是他什么都没有了。
However, Moses here, he did not have anything.
直到神拣选他出来。
Until the time when God chose him to call him out.
当然我们 不是很清楚到底他怎么过这段日子。
And of course, we are not completely sure how Moses led his life during this period.
但是我们既然来讲中年危机，我们就可以从他的著作当中去找出一些线索。
And since we are talking about Moses' midlife crisis, we can gather some information from some of Moses' work.
其实如果你看很多的一些文章啦，他们都会教我们怎么去度过这个中年危机。
And today we can find a lot of articles which teaches us how we can live through our midlife crisis.
好，比如说不要太复杂的人际关系。
For example, they teach us that we should not have too complex interpersonal relationship.
然后培养一个比较有长期的一种兴趣。
And it encourages us to cultivate a long-term good habit or interest.
然后定期要跟家里有一个所谓的修补的一个生活。
And it also encourages us to set times in order to build up good connections and relationship within our families.
对，比如说定期出去旅游，这样。
For example, we set aside time to go traveling with our families.
然后给自己一个学习的目标。
Or to give ourselves a goal in learning certain things.
很多啦，你自己去看啦，这个讲不完。
And we cannot. There's too many suggestions about this. You can read it themselves.
那我相信也真的有这样子的危机的人，他也知道怎么去寻找帮助，然后来度过这个难关。
So I believe for many people who are going through a midlife crisis, they also know where to look for information and resources in order to help them.
但是摩西他是用信仰的角度来面对人生的危机。
However, for Moses, we can see that he faced his midlife crisis from the perspective of his own faith.
当然不只是中年了，到人生的危机这样子。
And of course, not only towards the midlife crisis, but also throughout his whole life.
我们如果看诗篇的90篇。
If we turn to Psalms 90,
那这边就很清楚谈到这个作者是摩西。
Psalms 90, the author for this psalm is Moses.
那他大概可以分成2个部分。
And this psalm we can roughly divide it into 2 sections.
前半部他讲的就是人生又苦又短，简单这么讲。
In the first part of his psalms, Moses describes the difficulties and sufferings of human life.
然后又谈到人生的结局又是如何这样。
And he also talks about the ending of our lives.
换句话说，他就是告诉你人生的真相啦，简单这么讲。
And to summarize this first part, basically what Moses was teaching us is about the realities of life.
有一次我看了一篇文章，当中有2句话这么说。
And there was once I've read an article, and there was a phrase within this article that says,
他说你要怎么知道你是从青年步入中年？
So the article questions that how can you tell whether you have entered from youth to into a middle-aged life?
就是当你开始深深感受到人生很苦。
And the answer was that when you start to realize that life is actually full of sorrows and sufferings.
当你什么时候从中年步入到老年？
And then the next question is, how do you know when you are moving from midlife into the older life stage?
就是当你开始深深的感受到人生的短。
And the answer is when you realize that life is indeed very short.
所以这段其实摩西他用一个很精彩的描述来谈到人生。
And so from this psalm, we can see how Moses he describes what life truly is.
第3节说我们的人生的结局就是尘土。
And in verse 3, it says that the ending of all men is to return to dust.
然后世人要归回。
And that all people will return.
所以 return 就是说回到之前离开的地方。意思是这样。
The word return means that they will return to the place where they originally came from.
我们从尘土而来，我们就归回尘土。
And because we are originally made from dust, and therefore we will all return to dust.
第4节是说人时间过得很快。
And verse 4 describes how the time of our lives goes past really fast.
千年好像已经过了昨天一样。
That 1,000 years seems like past just like yesterday.
我想大家绝对可以承认说，2020年到2021年是过得非常的快。
So I believe a lot of us sitting here would experience this and say that year 2020 and the year 2021 has indeed gone past very fast.
因为它都一样没什么变化。
And because during these years, things are pretty much the same for all of us.
也不能做什么计划。
And we cannot make much plans during this time.
对我来讲，我就是在家里。
And as for myself, I've spent my time at home all the time.
我发现我出门只有带去教会才出门。
And I realized that the only time I would leave the house is the time when I leave to go to church.
所以就是一直待在家，然后当然就是要准备道理啦，然后牧养信徒啦，然后领会的这样子。
And for most of my time, I would be staying at home and preparing to do sermons and also help in the pastoral work of the brethren, etc.
但是也因为这样，所以觉得时间过得好快。
And because of the situation, I also felt that time goes by really quickly.
那第5节就说到人生就是一去不复返。
And verse 5 continues to describe that life, when it goes past, it will never go back to what it was.
就像水冲去，你不能再收回来一样。
It's just like a great flood that flushes across. We cannot bring things back.
人生就像睡觉一样。
And that life is just like a sleep.
就是说用很多的梦所组成的一种人生。
And life is just like sleeping, where one would have many dreams.
可能你在睡觉的时候，你做很多的梦。
And perhaps when you sleep, you would have many kinds of dreams.
醒过来之后，記得沒幾個，可能很多都忘記了。
But when you wake up, then you realize that you have forgotten most of what you have dreamt.
其實人生也是這樣。
In fact, life is truly like this.
你記得都是痛苦的事情。
And all the things that you can remember are things that bring sufferings and sorrows.
那個快樂的事情都記不太起來。
And it is difficult for us to remember things that makes us happy.
我有太多的老師從我小學一直到我大學之後。
So I had many teachers from a time when I was in primary school right through to my university days.
坦白講，記得的更沒幾個。
To be frank, I cannot remember many of my teachers.
那印象最深刻就是最兇的啦。那個記得特別清楚。
But there is one teacher that I remember very clearly, and it was because this particular teacher, he was extremely fierce.
我那1、2 9的那個化學老師，我到現在都記得他。
And my year 9 chemistry teacher, I still remember that teacher.
因為我們常常被打。
Because I remember we always were punished by this teacher in class.
在我們那個時候老師是可以打學生，現在是不行的了。
During my time as a student, the teachers were allowed to punish the student in class. Of course, we cannot do this today.
他都是用那個短短的水管，哇，那個很痛啊，輕輕一下就很痛啊。
And I remember my teacher, he would use this very short hose-like object, and he would hit us with it, and it was extremely painful.
那這個老師長什麼樣子，我到現在還記得。
And how my teacher looked like, I can still remember very clearly.
人生就是這樣。
And such is life.
那後面談到人生很脆弱。
And what follows on describes that life is actually quite fragile.
像草一樣，然後早上發芽，晚上就枯乾。
And it is just like grass that it grows up and flourish in the morning, but by evening it withers and it is cut down.
当然这是特别指巴勒斯坦，他们尤其在南地他们也旷野那边的草啦，特别是指那边的草这样。
And of course, this description is particularly referring to the grasses that can be found in the southern part of Palestine.
因为摩西都生长在旷野嘛，所以他看的是旷野的草是这样子的。
And because Moses, he spent most of his life in the wilderness, and therefore when he made such description, he's describing the grass that grew in the wilderness.
那接下来他谈为什么我们人生是又短又苦。
And then what follows this, Moses continued to explain why our lives are short and it's filled with a lot of sufferings.
第7节讲的关键就是神的怒气。
And verse 7 tells us it is because of God's anger.
那神为什么生气
？And why is it that God is angry towards us?
第8节说因为人的罪。
Verse 8 tells us it is because of our iniquities, our sins.
有的是明显的，有的是隐恶，就是被隐藏起来的，这个不好。
Some sins are exposed, but there are sins that are hidden.
那这个都是要摆在神面前，所以我们跑不掉的。
However, all that we have committed, our wrongs and sins, will eventually be placed open before the eyes of God.
所以第9节说，我们经过日子都在你震怒之下。
That's why in verse 9 it says that all our days have passed away in God's wrath.
他说我们甚至说我们年岁妒忌的年岁好像一声叹息。
And then Moses also describes that we finish our lives just like a sigh.
那这个叹息就是用个那种很沮丧的声音来表达那种人生的类似像这样子来表达人生的这种来描写人生这样。
And the word sigh here is used to describe that extreme, to describe the sorrows and sufferings that one would go through their lives, and that is why they sigh in this way.
好，所以第10节说我们一生70强壮到80。
Verse 10 tells us the days of our lives are 70 years.
可以夸口不过是劳苦跟愁烦。
And we can only boast of labor and sorrow.
然后接下来我们就像飞一样，咻就不见了。
And then what follows is that very soon we will be cut off and we fly away.
那这个飞好，这应该是指的类似像那种旷野当中一些小小的植物了。
And when it says that we will fly away, it is likely describing that little plants that can be found in the wilderness that get blown off by the wind.
比如说那些小小看那些花那风一吹就咻就没了这样子。
Like the small flowers, when the wind blows, then it will be blown away.
好，那这个就是我们讲前半段他描写人生的真相。
So the first part of this psalm, Moses described the realities of life.
我们在讲中年危机的时候，我们特别谈到说，中年它一个特征就是他开始感受到人生的脆弱。
And when we talked about midlife crisis, one of the special characteristics of a person when they go through midlife crisis is to realize that life is actually quite fragile.
开始有感受到那个死亡的意识。
And one would start to think about and also ponder upon the matter of death.
但有些人开始去运动然后呢，让自己身体更健康，这个是很好的做法。
And there are many people, because of this, they will start to live a more healthier lifestyle by doing more exercises and being more healthier. Of course, these are good things.
有些人到中年的时候开始因为一场疾病，他就开始要做一个比较有健康的活动。
And therefore, for a certain group of people, when they reach their midlife, and particularly after they have recovered from a serious illness, they would decide to pick up an exercise in which they will continue to do.
比如说有一个弟兄呢，他中年的时候才40出头而已，就有那个心血管堵塞。
And for example, we have a brother, he was in his early 40s, and he had blocked heart arteries.
他自己也没有想到怎么会有这个病。
And he himself also could not understand why he would get this kind of heart disease.
就有一天上班的时候，他气快喘不过来。
And there was one day when he went to work, he realized that he was really short of breath.
他赶快送到医院去。
And they quickly sent him to the hospital.
医生说你已经堵塞了一个血管。
And the doctor has discovered that he had a blocked artery around the heart.
当然感谢神，后来他很快的手术完之后就出院了。
And we thank the Lord that very quickly they went through the procedure and he came out from the surgery room.
那开始就改变吃东西的方式，然后开始有运动，就开始生活就做很大的调整。
And since that incident, this brother, he started to eat very carefully, very healthily, and also he started to do a lot of exercise.
那当然这个绝对是好的。
And of course, by doing these things, these are good.
但那个摩西他不讲这个了。
However, Moses here, he does not talk about these things.
他从另外一个角度来谈。
And he viewed all this from a different perspective.
我们刚才讲说人生又苦又短，最主要关键是神的怒气。
So we've mentioned that life is short and full of sorrows. It is because of God's wrath towards us.
换句话说，我们要开始要调整人生，必须要先面对神的怒气。
In other words, it teaches us that when we want to change our lives, we must first learn how to face God's wrath.
所以11节说，谁晓得你怒气的权势呢？
And that is why verse 11 says, Who knows the power of your anger?
谁能够按照你所该受的敬畏晓得你的愤怒呢？
So who is able to fear you and also to understand your wrath?
那这个就是整首诗歌当中的一个转折点。
And this particular verse 11 is actually a turning point in this particular psalm.
那所以从第12节开始，就是谈到怎么样去度过一些人生的危机。
And from verse 12 onwards, he teaches us how we ought to live our life to overcome midlife crisis.
当然也包括对，人生危机也当然包括中年危机啊。
And also to how to overcome many other kinds of challenges as well throughout our lives.
我们看第一个。
And let us look at the first one.
我们看第12节。
Verse 12. Verse 12. So teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom.
第一个必须要学会数算自己的日子。
The first thing we need to learn is we must learn to number our days.
什么叫做数算？
What does it mean to number?
这叫好像我们在做记账一样。
And so to number means it's just like when we're doing some calculations.
譬如说我们如果是有收入的话，就是放在 credit， 对不对
？And so for example, all our income would be going into the credit.
那如果是支出的话，就放在那个 debit， 就是那个债务这部分。
And all our expenditures would be in the debit section.
然后最后我们再算一个结果，看它的 balance 是什么样子。
And at the very end, we would come out with a balance of what all these come out to.
这就是数算呐。
So this is what we mean by to number.
如果今天就是因为我们今天为什么会想要做账，就因为钱不多啦。
So today, why do we calculate and look at our expenses? Because we don't have a lot of our funding.
或者说这个我们要控制我们的预算，所以你要好好的算，你要好好的去算这个花多少钱。
Or it is because we want to have a good control of our spending. That is why we make such calculations.
所以你用把算钱的这个想法放到我们的时间这样子，它的观念是这个意思。
So by using this concept, if we place this kind of concept when we make calculations regarding money, and using this concept, apply it into our lives, our time.
我们看一下诗篇的39篇。
Let us turn to Psalms 39.
39篇的第4节。
Psalms 39 verse 4.
39篇是大卫的诗。
Psalms 39 was a psalm written by King David.
哇，可能他面对那些敌人，他很害怕讲错话。
And we can see that when David he was faced with his enemies, he was extremely careful and afraid of the words that he speak.
所以第1节说，哇，用嚼环勒住的舌头。
That is why verse 1 he describes that he will guard his ways and restrain his mouth with a muzzle.
哇，结果呢，就圣灵在你心里面发热了。
But then the Holy Spirit burned within him.
所以第3节说，我默想的时候，火就烧起来，用舌头说话。
That's why in verse 3 describes that his heart was hot within him, and when he was musing, the fire burned, and he spoke with his tongue.
好，所以这个就是这边也可以看到，大卫也曾经说方言过。
And so from here we can see that David had also spoke in tongues.
那在说方言之后呢，他的心是一念，马上就转个想法，转另外一个想法。
And when he started to speak in tongues, his whole mindset, thinking, turned and viewed things from a different perspective.
不再看那些对他不好的人。
He no longer puts his focus on the enemies who were against him.
而是他看到他的人生 最后看我的身之终是什么。
And rather, he put his focus now on his whole life.
他说你叫我知道我的人生命不长。
He said, Lord, make me know my end, and what is the measure of my days.
所以他第5节说你使我的年日好像窄如手掌这样子。
In verse 5, David described that you have made my days as handbreadths.
意思说一下就看完的意思。
In other words, that it is extremely short, that it is over within a small amount of time.
人生这么短，还在跟你计较这些人，实在是浪费时间了，对不对？
So life is truly very short. Therefore, there's no point arguing with all these evil people.
这个跟这个摩西所讲的观点也很类似。
And so the concept that David spoke of in this psalm is actually very similar to what Moses described in his psalm.
所以什么叫做？所以我们再看回来诗篇第90篇。
So if we turn back to Psalms 90,
说数算日子目的是要得到智慧的心。
and the purpose of numbering our days is so that we can gain a heart of wisdom.
我自己有时候就好奇算一算。
So sometimes I become curious, and therefore I will do this calculation.
譬如说，假设人生70，强壮80，我就算75好了。
And so the Bible describes that our lives are 70 years. By reason of strength is 80, so I'll go in between. I'll go 75 years.
那1/3就是要放在睡觉，对不对？
So a third of our lives is occupied by our sleep.
因为小时候睡长一点，老的时候睡短点，好，我们就算1/3好了。
And so because when we're younger, we slept longer, but as we grew older, we sleep less, and therefore we'll just make it as a third of our life is dedicated to sleeping.
这样25年就没有了呢。25年就没有了。
If we think about this, a third, that means 25 years has gone by.
那另外1/3时间就是你必须要做的事情。
And the other 1/3, we allocate this to the things that we must perform and do.
比如说工作啦。
For example, our daily work.
比如说吃饭啊，这个洗澡啦，这种是一定要每天做的。
Our day-to-day necessities like eating, showering, etc.
好，那这个大概也要25年。
And so a third of this again would be another 25 years.
那25，那所以等于是我出生开始到人生结束，其实我自己可以用就25年。
And so in other words, from the time that we are born into this world to the time we leave this world, if we think of 75 years, the only time that we have for ourselves is actually only 25 years.
那我现在目前52岁嘛。
And so I'm currently 52 years.
所以这样算一算，我这样算一算只剩下7.6年。
So if I were to make this calculation, so I've only have about 7 years.
7.6 对啊，
7.6.
对，那大概是就是7年算7年半好了，算7年半。
So about 7.5 years.
所以很短，对，自己可以用的时间就有那么短而已。
So life is indeed very short. The time that I have for myself to do things is extremely short.
所以有时候算一算，真的会知道，其实人生真的是不像我们想象的，好像时间很多可以用。
And so if we truly think about this matter, we would realize that as we live in this world, we really don't have much time to do the things that we think we can do.
曾经我看了一篇文章，
And I have once read another article.
他说大概在2019，应该2000年以前，2000年以前。
And so in this article, it describes about 2000 years ago.
不是，就是公元2000年以前，公元20世纪啦，应该20世纪。
In the 20th century.
那因为那个时候，就大概人生就分成我们很自然分成3个阶段。
And so at that time, they divided a person's life into roughly 3 stages.
第一个就是学习嘛。
The first stage is a stage of learning.
那第二个阶段就是工作。
And second stage is a stage of working.
然后第3个阶段就是退休。
And the third stage is a stage in which one retires.
所以这个是很标准的这个人生的三个分段这样。
And so they have divided a person's life into these 3 stages in one's life.
那从2000年之后，那时候网络开始慢慢的这个整个发展起来。
So in the 20th century, we know that the advancement of the internet gradually became advanced, and it spreads.
那它让很多的事情都打破原来传统的一些想法。
And because of that, there are many things that has exceeded a lot of traditional ways of thinking.
所以他那个作者就这么讲哈。
So the author of this article, he said this.
他说，其实最圆满的生活规划，应该是你每天都有学习、工作跟退休。
And the author summarized that the most meaningful type of life a person can lead is that for every single day that they live, they would have they would learn something, they would do their work, as well as having some time to rest or retire.
那对我们基督徒应该加上安息日啊，每天的安息日啊。
For us Christians, we can also add on having the Sabbath as well.
就是敬拜神哈。
And that is the time which we worship God.
换句话说，你每天都应该有学习啊。
In other words, that every single day that we live our lives, we should have something that we learn.
工作啊。
And also to do the work we ought to do.
休息啊。
And also time for us to rest.
灵修啊。
And also time to spiritually cultivate ourselves.
他这个工作不一定是指的说你去公司上班赚钱，不一定是这样子。
So when we talk about things, the work that we must do, it's not necessarily referring to our day-to-day professional job.
那工作应该是说，他是要你花比较长时间付出劳力的特质这样啊。
And to work means it teaches us we must spend time to produce certain kind of labor.
啊，然后当然你会得到一些报酬，不一定是钱，有时候是精神上的报酬这样。
And of course, by spending time to labor, we would get some kind of reward, and it's not necessarily money as a reward.
换句话说，我们如果说我们有弟兄姐妹，虽然感觉上已经退休了，其实也是要工作。
So in other words, that for example, as for some of our brothers and sisters who are already retired, in your retirement, you can still do work.
当然这工作就是看每个人就看法就因人而异这样子哈。
And as for what kind of work, then it all depends on each individuals.
慢慢有些人在中年的时候会把很多的工作慢慢就拨到教会里面来。
And for a lot of people, when they reach their midlife, very often they would cater a lot of their work towards the church.
换句话说，他们会把这种义工哈，就是所谓的没有金钱报酬这种工作，慢慢投入越来越多在这个上面。
In other words, they would spend a lot more time on divine works in the church.
前阵子因为我比如说在悉尼教会白天他们都有家庭聚会。
And recently, for example, in Sydney, the brethren there, they will always have family services in the daytime.
那我都会介绍一首诗歌。
And during these family services, I would often introduce a hymn to them.
那接下来我就会找一些诗班唱的唱，然后大家跟着诗班唱。
And I would find some recordings of certain choir groups who sang this particular hymn, and I would ask everyone to sing along together.
那如果是有中文的话，我就会大概会找很多都台湾教会的一些诗班这样。
And then if it's members who speaks Chinese, then I would look for the hymns sung by the choirs in Taiwan.
那里面当中很多人我都认识。
And among the choir members, there are lots that I know personally.
好，比如说他们有些都是50几岁、60几岁了。
So a lot of them are already in their 50s and 60s.
他们就参加诗班，然后训练，然后献诗这样。
Yet they still joined in choir, and they also were involved in presentations, etc.
好，那这我觉得或许这也是不错啊，就是说找到一个让你有不断 定期的去付出的这个的圣工来投入，其实这是蛮好的。
So I think this is a very good thing because it allows one person to have a particular work in which one must put effort in and to put in work to do.
好，那当然每个教会的背景不太一样。
And of course, for every churches, their situations and backgrounds are different.
我也知道有些开始就是工作自己在外面的工作不需要付太多时间，那他就会多很多时间去在读经啊，开始在研究圣经。
And I also know of certain brethren that when they no longer have to work full time in their professional job, then they spend a lot of times studying the Bible and the scriptures.
这也是很好啊，这也是很好。
And I also think that this is a very good idea.
那这个才叫做数算日子啊。
And this is what we mean by to number our days.
因为你只是算我生命时间很短，然后呢，让你短就好好利用嘛，对不对
？So because there is no point calculating and realizing our life is very short, we must realize how to use the time that we have.
这个是谈到分配时间。
So this is we're talking about allocating times to do things.
还有一种所谓的还有数算制时间是我们讲说乘法multiply 那种乘法。
And so there's another form of numbering our days, and it has to do with multiplication, multiply our days.
譬如说假设同样都是5分钟。
And for example, if we have 5 minutes,
那你5分钟用在自己身上就是5分钟咯。
And if you use these 5 minutes on yourselves,
但是如果你用在10个人身上，哇，那就10倍咯。
And if you use the 5 minutes on yourselves, then you only gain something yourselves. But if you use that 5 minutes on 10 other people, then 10 other people are able to gain something from it.
所以这个是一种思考啦。
So this is a type of thinking or mindset that we should think of.
曾经看了一篇文章，他们在描述日本人他们在老年人的生活。
And I've once read a book that describes and talks about the elderly Japanese people, how they live their life.
那里面当然有讲个实例啦。
实例
就是一个 example。
So inside they've mentioned one example.
说有一个老先生他退休应该是65岁以后退休。
So it talks about there's this old man when he retired at the age of 65.
然后也没事做在家里就感觉常常跟太太吵架。
And because he had nothing to do, he often stays at home, and then when he's at home, he often quarrels with his wife.
因为看这个不顺眼，看那个不顺眼。
Because he saw a lot of things at home, and he nitpicks on different things at home.
后来就吵架吵到最后，想想这也不是办法。
And because the quarreling continues, and he thought to himself that this cannot continue.
所以他就开始出去开那个计程车。
And so he went out, and then he started to he started to drive a taxi.
他本来是公司的高阶主管就是 manager。
So originally he worked in an organization as a manager.
但是他去开计程车目的不是要赚钱，因为他有退休金了。
And but he went out, became a taxi driver. Purpose is not to earn earnings because he had a lot of money already.
他只是说这个机会服务大家，然后开始有点不太习惯，后来发现哇也不错啊，然后在让乘客高兴，他就心里又高兴这样。
And because he wanted to become a taxi driver so that he can serve other people to make people happy.
那另外还有一个介绍一个年长的这个妇人
And another example they introduced was an elderly lady.
她年纪就是有时候闷在家里，有时候真的有时候会生病啊。
And because if one were to always stay at home and being cooped up at home all the time, one can fall sick.
后来他就跑到学校里面去准备那些餐点给那些学生吃啊。
And later on, this lady, she decided she would go to a nearby school and to help out in the canteen to prepare meals for the students.
那个是不收钱的，就是义工啊。
And all these are done voluntarily.
然后哇，看到这些小孩子吃觉得很好吃，他就很高兴这样。
And so when she saw that when the children, when they ate their meals, they were extremely happy, she herself was also happy for them.
所以她做到90岁还继续做这种工作。
And she continued in this work until she was in her 90s.
当然这个都是外面的例子。
So of course these are examples from outside.
我也相信我们教会有很多很多的这种很正面的例子，这种即使是年老者，他们像棕树一样一直不断的发结果子这样。
So I believe that even within our church today, we have also many other good examples from our elderly brothers and sisters.
我记得我们有个弟兄
And I remember that we have our brother.
应该是老执事啦，不是弟兄，老执事
对，
他是弟兄啦，对。
So we have an elderly deacon.
那他我那时候30几岁的时候，他已经70岁了。
So when I was about 30 years old, he was already in his 70s.
他每2个礼拜他都会到安老院去，我们教会办的那个安老院去。
So every 2 weeks he would join in the visitation to the aged care center.
然后他就为这些老人他剪头发。
And he would offer his services to help the elderly people in the center and to cut their hairs.
因为他本来他以前就是理发师嘛。
And because he was previously he was a hairdresser.
然后后来退休了也不需要再赚钱了。
And but later on when he retired, there's no need for him to work full time.
然后现在变成是免费为那些老人2个礼拜去剪头发这样。
So now he offers his skill, his talent for free for those for the elderly.
那刚好那次我到那个教会去，他就碰到我去安老院，碰到我就叫我去剪头发。
So coincidentally, I was there and I met up with this brother, and he asked me to come over so he can give me a haircut.
我当然很高兴不用钱的对不对
？Of course, I was very happy I can get a haircut for free.
而且技术又很好。
And of course, he was extremely skillful as a hairdresser.
我想这个不是只有老年的，中年也是这样。
So I believe this does not only apply to the elderly, but also to those in their middle age.
好，那怎么样去面对这种中年危机？我想第一个就好好数算我们的日子。
And so one way in which we can face a midlife crisis, first thing we must learn to do is to learn to number our days.
好，我们知道人生很短。
Because we realize that life is truly very short.
我们有限时间我们要怎么分配？
And then so with the time that we have, we must learn to allocate properly the things that we need to do.
然后我们是不是这个时间不只是用在自己或是自己身上，或是不是可以用在更多人身上？这也是我们可以思考的一个方向。
And we also need to ponder and think about whether we only use the time for ourselves, our own benefits, or do we use our time to benefit other people?
好，那其他的我们星期五再说。
And as for the rest, we shall further our discussion on Friday.
好，我们一起来唱诗。
So let us now sing hymn
467首。
Hymn 467.